And good evening and welcome to SIG's weekly webinar series. My name is Sarah Holloman and it is my distinct pleasure to facilitate this webinar today, which is being brought to you by two of my very favorite SIG champions from Mayer Brown. But before I introduce you to them, we have a few calendar items and other things that we'd like to cover with you. First off is our 2015 benchmarking survey. I know many companies participated in this last year, and we spoke about it at the Denver Summit in the fall of last year. We're doing this benchmarking survey again. We would love to have your contributions to this survey. This is one of the biggest things we hear from our members, that they want benchmarking and opportunities to see what other leading companies are doing. This is your opportunity. So if you're interested in participating, please reach out to us. You can specifically reach out to Kim Parisi at SIG. It's kparisi@sig.org, or just let us know and we'll put you in touch with the right people. The deadline for participation is September 25th, and we'd love to have your participation. The Member Loyalty Program, this is something that we started about a year ago, and it allows you to earn points by really just engaging with SIG, attending our events, dialing into them like you are today, speaking at an event, uploading content into our SRC, and more. So if you are a SIG member, please check it out and see what types of prizes and whatnot you can earn. If you are not allowed to accept a prize, you can also donate to a charity. So there are some really great things that are part of our member loyalty program, and it's just our way to say thanks to you. The Career Network is bursting with jobs. So if you are searching for a job in procurement sourcing or outsourcing, we have a very long list of great opportunities that are available in our Career Network. We also love to post internships. So if you have an internship that you would like to post, if you are in need of interns, please reach out to us. We would love to post those internships on our website as well. SIG is very actively engaged in social media, and we hope that you are engaged with us in social media. We have a presence on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and we have a blog, and we hope that you're engaging with us. If you are not members of our LinkedIn group, we hope that you'll join our LinkedIn group and join in our peer-to-peer resource discussion as well. That is a benefit to SIG members, where you can pose a question to the SIG community and get a quick response on it. We also post those in our LinkedIn group. So please do engage with us on social media. The SIG webinar series, this is something that you're participating in right now. We have a very full lineup of webinars over the next few weeks and months, and we hope that you will join us for those. There are two different types of webinars. We have both thought leadership webinars, which are very educational in content, and which is what you're joining today. We also have solution deep dives. Those are not an opportunity for our sell-side members to sell to you, but they are an opportunity for you to learn about a specific solution that they provide. So we highly encourage you to see what type of webinar you're signing up for, but to join us for all of them, because you will learn something new on every webinar that you attend. They do all require a unique registration, so please make sure when you log onto the website that you register for each one you're interested in independently. The Town Hall Teleconference is something we started a little over a year ago, and this is a really great program where we bring a small group of buy-side attendees together. We have a facilitated open mic private conversation, meaning that they are not recorded. These are really great discussions where you can hear about specific topics and talk to your peers about how they have been addressed in different companies. Our next one is on October 15th. It is called 50 Shades of Stakeholder Management. I heard Kristen give this presentation once before. It's a really fantastic topic and very engaging. And Kristen is with Russell Investment, and she will be speaking on October 14th. So please register with us for that as well. We have a number of different events still coming up this fall that are in local communities. In fact, we are right now, as I speak, in Columbus, Ohio. John Powell is facilitating a session there today. And yesterday we had an event in London, which was a really phenomenal event. We had about 40 or 50 people at our regional roundtable in London yesterday. We have events still coming up in New York this fall, which I have the privilege of being in attendance for that one. I hope you'll join me there, as well as the Bay Area. And then we'll be in Raleigh, North Carolina, as well as potentially in Sydney, Australia later this year as well. So if you are on the buy side and in one of those cities, please register or encourage your colleagues that are in those areas to register for those events, because they're really great ways for you to spend a day getting some of the latest thought leadership and meeting some other colleagues in your local community. Our summit is our marquee event, and that is taking place October 27th to 29th in Huntington Beach. We have a record number of people registered for this so far, and so we are very excited about this. We have some phenomenal people lined up to speak. As you can see on the screen, those are some of the recent speakers we've had at this event. We have some amazing keynote speakers that are coming to the summit this time, including the former CIO of the White House, Teresa Payton, who's going to talk about cybersecurity, big data, and the Internet of Things. We also have Kate Vitasek, who will be speaking on topics that are in her latest book, which has really received some rave reviews. So we have a terrific agenda. It's already very built out and public and has been out there for a while. You can see it on our website, so please take a look at the agenda on the website at sig.org/summit. And you'll be able to get a glimpse of the different topics. There's a heavy emphasis on risk this time, which we are very lucky to have these speakers here who both have a lot of knowledge in this area. So it's a really heavy topic on risk, and we hope that you'll join us for that. Please register early. Do reserve your room. They can sell out. So I encourage you to get those rooms registered and register as soon as possible for the summit as well. SIG University is something that we are in the process of launching, very excited about it. It's an online certification program. The certification is good for 5 years. We have tracks in both sourcing, outsourcing, procurement on one side, and then governance on the other, and both at a professional level and an advanced level. And we will be officially launching it with our first semester in January. So we are working feverishly on that, very excited about this certifying sourcing leaders, and we hope that you'll take a look at that as a way to supplement some of the training in your own organizations or your own individual training as well. Stay tuned for more on that. We will be discussing it at the summit. Very excited about that. And then finally, our Student Talent Outreach Program. This is something that we started kind of a year ago, but really in earnest in the spring, where we partner with universities and introduce their students to the seasoned supply chain executives that are within our own SIG community. It gives them an opportunity to hear thought leadership from some of these professionals. It gives you an opportunity to meet some of the upcoming bright supply chain future leaders. We've had about 16, I believe it was, students at our last summit. We will have about the same number from some of the leading institutions in the U.S. on master's degrees, master's in supply chain programs in the U.S. will be represented there. So we're very excited about that. We've recently partnered with a couple of additional universities, including the University of Tennessee, and some others as well. And so we're very excited about this program and hope that you will engage with the students if you're with us at the summit. So with that, I am going to introduce our phenomenal speakers. And I truly mean this when I tell you that these are two of my favorite people. They're both really, truly wonderful speakers. I've had the opportunity to hear both of them speak on numerous occasions, and we're very lucky to have them both with us today. Brad is a partner with Mayer Brown. He focuses on business process and information technology outsourcing. He has represented numerous information technology buyers in hundreds of technology transactions, including cloud computing, software licensing, software development agreements, hosted services agreements, and ERP implementation agreements. And he is being joined by Rebecca Eisner, who is also a partner with Mayer Brown. Rebecca serves on Mayer Brown's partnership board and focuses her practice on technology and business process outsourcing and sourcing, information technology transactions, privacy, and security. She's represented both buyers and providers of technology goods and services, and has extensive areas and expertise in software licensing, ERP implementations, back office processing services, ASP agreements, and hosting and data center agreements, just to name a few. So they're wonderful speakers. Before I turn it over to them, I should tell you that if you have any problems with audio or any difficulty hearing, please use the chat functionality, which is located on the lower right-hand side of your screen. Please also feel free to submit questions during this webinar, just clicking on the question mark on the bottom right-hand side of your screen as well, because our speakers will be happy to take your questions throughout this webinar. And with that, I'm going to hand this over to our phenomenal and wonderful speakers from Mayer Brown and let them share their content with us.
Thank you, Sarah. This is Brad Peterson from Mayer Brown, and Sarah, it's great to hear all the things that SIG is doing. It's just absolutely tremendous to see so much activity. And what you're doing now with social media, and particularly SIG University, which is something sorely needed by our industry to help the growth of the talent within the industry and provide an opportunity to bring new talented people up through the ranks, is tremendous. Rebecca and I joined Mayer Brown's nascent technology practice about 20 years ago when we were excited about the opportunities created by the Internet, and had the good fortune to be at a firm which has grown into one of the largest of the international law firms. We now have 50 lawyers around the world specializing in business and technology sourcing. We've advised clients in hundreds of significant outsourcing transactions with an aggregate deal value well over $100 billion. And now we are finding that this is one of the most exciting times since we have joined Mayer Brown because of the amazing amount of new technology, which we're referring to in this presentation as the digital age. And with that, let me turn it over to Rebecca to talk about our agenda.
Thank you, Brad. Just to briefly cover what we'll be talking about today, we'll cover what we mean by digital age services in a little more detail so that you understand some examples of what we're talking about. We'll address some of the typical benefits and problems with digital age services. We'll spend a little time talking about why the traditional way of sourcing might not fit digital age services. And then finally, we'll talk about how you might reimagine your sourcing for digital age services. So just to give you an example of what we're talking about and what we mean by digital age services, we've got two different categories here, some interface technologies that are pretty simple and easy to understand because you see them every day, social media, mobile computing, and Internet of Things, connected cars, connected appliances, Fitbits, personal wear that is Internet connected. All of these things are Internet of Things. And those are certainly digital age services. On the computing side, the second group here, which is going to be highly used within many enterprises, we've got big data and analytics as one of the digital age services, vast stores of data that can be analyzed very quickly, often, by the way, in reliance on use of cloud platform services, so private and public cloud services that are available, things like AWS, Microsoft Azure, et cetera. Software as a service, which many, many companies are using now. And then three that sound a little newer, and I'll just take a moment to explain them, autonomics and robotic process automation. These are things that essentially replace human functions with automated ones. So any time that you have anything that's rule-based, it can be automated and probably done a little more efficiently than perhaps humans doing it. We see this in the network monitoring area where we're able to reduce the number of people who need to sit and monitor screens for network monitoring because there's better software and programs that can do that automatically. Certainly in the consumer area, the Nest thermostat is a good example of process automation where, and actually it's also an example of cognitive computing, the next one, because this device will monitor your habits and start to make more efficient energy consumption choices for you. And then finally we have X as a service, something as a service. And this is any number of areas from buying security as a service to virtual desktop or any number of other examples that exist. So when we talk today about digital age services, please keep these things in mind. We're up for our first polling question, and you'll see the polling question appear to the right of your screen. So we'd like to get a sense of where your company is today on use of these digital age services. Are you not using it all? Are they used by your business units on an ad hoc basis? Are they in a pilot or proof of concept phase? Are they a strategic direction and your implementation is well underway, or are they at full maturity, an integrated core part of how you do your business?
Okay, so the poll is open on the right-hand side of your screen. You can see the polling question and the responses. It'll be open for about 20 seconds. While our attendees are registering their responses, Rebecca or Brad, what do you expect the response to be on this?
I would expect it to be somewhere in the A to C range. Although certainly many companies are making use of social media, but some of these other digital age services like cognitive computing and autonomics, et cetera, are much more nascent.
Right. Okay, our poll has closed. The results will come up here in just a second. Those will pop up on the same spot there. And for those of you who are following along by PDF, who are not, we're looking at the webinar on screen. We're on page 18 currently. Results show 36% said that their company is in strategic direction with implementation in progress, followed by E, which is an integrated core part of how you do your business, then used by business units on an ad hoc basis. Are you surprised by that?
As I think about the mix of services, no. I'm sure most companies are using cloud and, as I said, social media. So if we had broken that apart for some of these services, we might have seen different results.
Yeah, but it's great to see an audience of companies that are engaged with this topic. Now, as we talk about the
back one.
we are back one. Perfect. As we talk about these new technologies and how you should approach them from a sourcing and contracting standpoint, an important thing is to note that these are, and you've heard this word many, many times, disruptive technologies. The word disruptive was coined by Clayton Christensen at Harvard Business School in 1997, about when Rebecca and I joined the business and technology sourcing practice here. And he looked and he realized that in industry after industry, you see the pattern that was happening at that point in the computing industry. You've got a group of companies like Amdahl and Honeywell, which are leading in mainframes, but none of them, exactly none of them, managed to survive well into the mini-computer era. And then when the microcomputer era came up, it was a new set of companies, Apple, Dell, companies like that, and none of the mini-computer companies managed to survive. And he said, why is that? And he realized that there is a challenge of what they call disruptive technologies, ones that don't just advance the current state of the art, but start off worse, not as good, and generally they're cheaper, simpler, smaller, more convenient to use, and so forth, but as they develop, become parts of core technology. And in our case, in digital age services, what we're seeing is products like cloud, for example, with exciting new capabilities, in some ways cheaper and smaller, flexibility on volumes, targeted solutions. They work well via the internet, which is perhaps not true of the technologies that you're trying to work with them on. They may require little or no investment because often they're consumer-based technologies. They're coming from a different direction, particularly with things like the Internet of Things. They may be technologies which are used really on the periphery that are coming into the core. However, there are also some absolutely critical problems. These great new digital age technologies generally are missing some of the fundamental capabilities for which you have been buying existing services for a long time. And at least at this point, they're relatively inflexible. You buy what the seller is selling. Also, because the sellers are not very confident in their products, and because right now the wind is at their back on the market, they are often offering their products on an as-is basis with as few promises as possible to you. They're conveying very little value compared to a traditional supplier. There are also risks. Cybersecurity is the one that we read about every day. You've got your Internet of Things embedded in an automobile, and there's a tremendous amount of publicity when that automobile gets hacked when it's on the road. There's also difficulty in integration and the displacement of people. So what are we seeing companies doing? A good example is a client I'm working with now. In 2004, they outsourced all of information technology, the information technology infrastructure function, to a single provider. That was a successful transaction for 10 years until the beginning of the beginning of the digital age. Now, they've replaced the largest portion of that with another managed service transaction for infrastructure, but also have a public cloud arrangement with both AWS and Microsoft, a private cloud for their various sensitive data, with the theory that they are using the public cloud for their public website, the private cloud for sensitive data such as credit cards, and then a completely new player in the infrastructure, a cloud integrator who integrates the public cloud, the private cloud, and the managed services. At the same point, they are investing in interfaces with companies for social, mobile, Internet of Things, and other digital age platforms. That is necessitating the addition of a security as a services vendor. This is all generating great data, which is being analyzed in a data warehouse. The lesson is that you may be dealing as sourcing people with an increasing number of suppliers providing an increasing number of niche services.
So we're going to talk a little bit about why your traditional approach to sourcing may not fit some of these digital age services that we've just talked about and that Brad has just given his example on. We've got, starting at the top, the dependence on our prescriptive RFP models that assume that customization is available really doesn't apply with digital age service providers. So in the more traditional way of sourcing services, we're used to sending out our requirements in prescriptive RFPs and having the providers fill them in, analyze them, and choose a supplier based on their responses as well as some follow-up discussion and negotiation. That model doesn't work well with digital age providers. There's also an expectation that you would be getting more traditional standard contract terms versus the newer flexible contracting terms, and in some cases the take it as it is contracting terms that you see with some of the digital age providers. In fact, we're seeing that customers are having to accept more risk than they've ever had to before, because under the more traditional model, the discussion and the negotiation was about shifting risk onto the supplier because the supplier was the expert in the area and the customer was in a position to enter into a very bespoke arrangement. But we don't have that with digital age services, and so we're seeing customers buying much more standardized services, but as a result, having to take more risk onto their side that they then need to figure out how to mitigate. We'll talk about mitigation later in the presentation. There's an expectation that services will be sourced through established channels, but in fact, what we're seeing in the digital age is rogue contracting. Many individuals at companies or business units going off on their own because of the simplicity and ease with which you can purchase these services through the internet, going off on their own and entering into contractual relationships with these providers. And the selection process that we're used to relies on the RFP responses, not on outside third-party certifications, for example, under industry standards like ISO 27001 and others. And then finally, it's more challenging in this area than ever before to truly do an apples-to-apples comparison, which used to be the objective of a sourcing process using an RFP, because many of the digital age provider solutions are very different in their capabilities.
Similarly, yesterday's contract templates will not meet your needs for digital age services or even integrated services where you have a traditional service that also has a digital age component. As Rebecca noted, the traditional assumption was that suppliers will provide services that meet your needs. They are, after all, the experts. The digital age assumption is that they have a product, it's a great product, and you will buy what they will sell. The traditional assumption is that services will be performed by people, and much of your contract is based on that assumption. The digital age assumption, if you look at the supplier's preferred form, is that the services will be performed by computers with robotic process automation and cognitive computing. Now, neither is entirely true, of course. The the ordinary services have always been performed with a healthy dose of computing, and digital labor has to be monitored, fixed, modified on a regular basis by people. So it's always a combination of people and computing, but the mix has shifted greatly. The pricing under contracting was previously metered primarily based on inputs or based on specific tasks being performed. In the digital age, you'll see more pricing based on access to some sort of a fixed cost infrastructure. Similarly, the value is moving, which we previously assumed was in performing a needed activity or providing a person to perform a needed activity. Much of the value is now shifted to the data being generated by the digital age service. Not so much just having an Internet of Things device, but having access and rights to use that data. Finally, you're looking for, the traditional assumption is that we would be looking for long-term contracts. In the digital age, suppliers aren't sure that they will be able or want to provide the services for very long, and customers might wonder whether any of these services will survive a year or two, or whether traditional suppliers will pick them up and integrate them. I'd add, not on the list, but because this is a new area, it is much more likely that your sourcing effort will be a collaborative effort developing something new to improve your business than merely a purchase of an input that you will use to run your business, creating a whole new set of issues around joint development.
So if we think back to Brad's slide on the old ITO outsourcing and then how many components it had broken into in the digital age, keep that picture in mind as we talk about the points on this slide. Each addition of one of these digital age providers requires integration into the overall platform. And these integrations require custom work because service levels and the support models from the services offered by the providers all vary. The services introduce new integration points and new potential points of failure of both service and security. And there's also an increased risk of failure that increases the need for operational risk mitigation strategies. For example, if you were using a cloud platform and there were aspects of that platform that didn't entirely meet your requirements or your needs, you might feel the need to have a separate and parallel backup cloud platform with another provider so that if something goes wrong with the first platform, you have a way to hopefully continue to operate on the second platform. And a good example of all of these points would be if you think about end-user computing and collaboration tools, everything from email to calendars, et cetera. In a typical environment, you might have some of that now on the cloud with something like a Microsoft 365 or perhaps Google. You might still have some on-premise email capability that you're still running out of your own shops. You add in the mobility piece, and all of these pieces need to tie together. So you think about the need to access calendars and directories or collaboration share spaces on mobile devices, and all of that has to work across your cloud applications as well as your on-premise applications. There's a lot of points of integration and potential, a lot of points for failure as well. When we think about two other areas that traditionally have been easy to manage or easier to manage in more traditional outsourcing arrangements like change management and incident management, and think about the complexity in the example that I just gave about if you're going to make a change in one piece, how is it going to ripple down through the others, you can begin to see the challenges in the digital age. Similarly with incident management, when something breaks in one piece, it might take more time and you certainly have more parties to contact to find out the source of the problem before you can get to solving it.
And that change management and incident management will have to be done by a governance organization that will face new challenges with digital age suppliers. First, the low-cost model of most digital age suppliers, and actually the organizational model of the new digital age suppliers, assumes that they will not need to talk to the customers very much. Unlike some of the traditional contracts where you have specific organizations set up for governance with regular meetings and regular reporting relationships, there may be no similar people for your contract with a digital age provider. It may be difficult to get the digital age providers to even sit down and think about discussing things with their traditional competitors. And while you might have in a traditional arrangement, even if there's no governance arrangement, if there are humans working on the process, they will be able to speak for themselves at change control meetings or just, in a hallway conversation to say, hey, I've got a governance problem here that we need to address. That won't be possible once a process is robotically automated. Similarly, the business units users will have little connection with the suppliers because they're not working with a live human as they receive the services. So you won't have the connection points at the business level either. And and chances are your customer governance teams are not currently staffed to educate the business about supplier services and the choices, and thus help replace the supplier's engagement team. So while it is possible to imagine that your vendor management organization might put 7 digital age offerings on the shelf and make those available within the organization, that will be a challenging job for anyone within that vendor organization to replace the traditional functions of these supplier sales organizations.
So very quickly, because we want to take you to the solution part of this presentation, so what can go wrong for you if you're still using your traditional sourcing approaches to buy digital age services? Well, first of all, you could be signing up a lot of one-sided supplier forms, including for some of your mission-critical functions, and those forms will not be very much in your favor. You might be buying the wrong types of services because you haven't adequately performed the diligence, or because of the rogue contracting going on in your organization we spoke about earlier. You actually might be undermining some of your existing sourcing relationships that are working well because you're breaking them into pieces, and now we've got a discontinuity of services. You might not be fully identifying and understanding and mitigating some of the risks. Often with digital age services, there can be surprise or hidden costs that we find that clients don't adequately take into account if they're not following the right sourcing process. Things like additional costs for e-discovery, litigation holds. These are examples of classic things that cost money to do, but when businesses quickly enter into, for example, cloud services or SaaS agreements, they often fail to consider how they will accomplish those important compliance items. And then finally, vendor management organizations, and we see this at a lot of our clients, are completely overwhelmed. The volume of contracting has picked up. We're not working off of standardized forms anymore. Everything is a one-off negotiation with a new provider. And it's after the contracting is done, there's very little ongoing monitoring and management of the suppliers.
So hopefully you will see a polling question appear to the right of your screen. The question is, how prepared are you to source digital age services? A, not at all prepared, looking for basic advice. B, inadequately prepared, looking to up your game. Moderately prepared, but open to new ideas. Or well prepared, but still on the webinar, just to gloat about how well you're doing, or to make sure that you are as fully prepared as you thought.
And that poll will be open for about 30 seconds more. And while we're waiting for the responses, I have a sort of a two-part question for you, and that is, what tools or methods have you seen work for accelerating technology contract negotiations? And the second part of the question is, every buyer has limited legal and procurement resources, but the appetite for these technologies are growing, so how can a buyer improve this process?
The first thing you need to do is think, and actually we'll be talking a bit about this, but the way to achieve efficiency is to think it through and have a process that you follow. And in this case, you will be dealing with a range of new technologies, and understanding the challenge first, and then developing, for example, new contract templates with new contract positions that you will be holding to over time is tremendously valuable. I see that we've got some answers on this, and it looks like, again, we've got the group on this phone call is I think, ahead of the game. You are For the most part, moderately prepared, but open to new ideas. And why don't we proceed through and provide some of those?
Yes, Sarah, I think those questions will hopefully be answered by the time we get through the second half of our presentation.
Yes.
Great.
On the one about legal and procurement, I think it is one of the pieces of advice that we'd give is that people take the ideas in this presentation about what you need to do to prepare and use those to create a business case to make a new investment in procurement and legal to be ready to source all these digital age services, because it will take some upfront investment. So the first piece is to understand the challenge for your company, understand your roadmap, understand the key sources of risk. And it seems like this audience is well along, so we'll turn it over to Rebecca for a couple of examples on the risk side from legal.
So if as Brad was saying, if you don't stop and do this, some of the new sources of risk that can come out of the legal side that you'll definitely want to take into account as you put together your new digital age sourcing strategy are dealing with inadvertent disclosure of confidential information or trade secrets by permitting uses of big data in ways that you didn't anticipate. Big data is terrifically helpful, but if you're the owner of the data, there can be a lot of value in it. You want to think about whether you want to be monetizing that value or whether you're willing to let someone else have the monetized value of your data. You want to think about protecting that in your contracts. You also want to think about, from the sources you've gathered the data from, do you have permissions to do all of the analytics that you want to do with that data? Certainly cyber and privacy law are big areas of compliance that you need to keep in mind. Failure to comply with records retention requirements, litigation holds and e-discovery, we've already mentioned in a prior example, and export law violations. So these are just some of the examples of some of the legal risks that hopefully after you work on your sourcing program here, which we're going to get to in the following slides, you will feel much more equipped to deal with.
And if you haven't done so already, build a digital age sourcing team that is cross-functional. This is a new technology, and to understand integration, you'll need a technical group. It supports your business objectives in new ways. You'll need business representatives to understand what you need from the new technology. You, of course, need legal support to avoid some of the risks that Rebecca just mentioned. You need people from your information security team to know what you can buy, what you can't buy, and how to segment things to control risk. Similarly, more generally, you need people from your legal compliance team. A fundamental deficiency of digital age services is that legal compliance for most industries has not been built into those products yet. As a result, having compliance representatives there to help you understand the risks will be enormously helpful. And finally, finance. Again and again, we hear examples where customers have gone to digital age products for cost savings that never materialized. And the risk is that a team of enthusiasts will bring in those products without doing adequate financial analysis and without seeing some of the hidden costs, and bringing in the finance team can help with that.
So, what are some of the things that you need to think about as you're creating a new sourcing strategy that will work for digital age services? I want to reiterate Brad's point earlier about the coming slides do require investment. They require time and effort on the part of the buying entity before you are really prepared to do this well. But it's worth the investment. It's worth taking the time to do some of these steps. So some of the things that you need to think about doing. First of all, you'll need to move to the idea of using requirements documents that you use to analyze the services that are offered by the providers. So we're moving away from prescriptive RFPs, and we're moving toward a company understanding what its requirements are and what it wants to buy, and then assessing the provider's offering against that requirements document. And importantly, because this is a shifting of where the work has to be done, it's often the customer that needs to do this assessment. It's been rather ineffective to send out RFPs to some of these providers and ask them to fill in the blanks. Many times we get back responses that say, go look behind this link for the answers to your questions. So that assessment is shifting to the customer side. Prepare a gap analysis and review it with the sourcing team. So figure out where there are service gaps in what you're looking to buy. Can it be filled with other solutions or not? You may have to build your own solution to cover a gap. You want to map the integration points. Remember the prior example, the ITO slide with all those different integration points. Where are those going to happen in the process? Now you're going to fill in with a mobile app provider. How does that provider need to connect into the data center, connect into the database that you have where you're analyzing and doing your analytics? You want to map your data flows. You want to determine the financial case for use of the solution, because as we said, forgetting to include certain hidden costs can have very detrimental effects on the business case for using a provider. And this first step is about doing a business assessment. So we're talking about business, operation, and technical assessment, and we'll move to a moment in doing the legal and the contract terms assessment. So for the moment, I'm now focusing on a risk assessment that is prepared by the business, the ops, and the tech team. So having done the analysis that you did on the prior slide, you've got your requirements, you've looked at what the solution is the provider offers, you create a risk assessment tool where you transfer that gap analysis into your risk assessment and you start assessing how you're going to mitigate some of these risks. And so we have an example here of a risk assessment tool that one of our clients has used. You start out by stating the risk on the left-hand side. So the provider services are not yet certified to the standards that are typically followed by the customer. This creates a service gap. What's the provider mitigation? Well, the provider says they're working on this certification, and it could be available in 12 to 24 months, but for right now, if you want to buy this provider's services, you're doing it without the provider having that certification. What can the customer do to mitigate this? Well, for the time being, maybe the customer is going to limit the amount of sensitive data that they put into with this particular digital age provider until the certification is completed. They're also going to monitor the status of the certification, and maybe the provider will get lucky and get it done in 6 months, at which point they can reassess and potentially put more business with the provider. So through putting this mitigation step in place, the customer has taken what could have been a higher risk down to a medium level of risk. The customer might consider doing other things too, like encrypting data as an added protection, but you'll certainly have to assess whether encryption will provide the desired protection and whether it will cause any other ripple or downstream effects. Now we're going to move into the legal contracting part of developing your sourcing model. And similar to what we just did on the business side, you're going to do a similar exercise on the contracting terms themselves. And you want to have in mind risk-based contracting. What that means is that instead of you using your standard terms that are very complete and cover everything that you know you've ever wanted to get in a sourcing relationship with a third party, you're probably going to have to assess against standard terms and conditions that are offered by the provider. And so here again, you're going to be creating and doing a gap analysis. What do their terms look like versus what my standards are? And the best thing that you can do to put yourself in the best position to both handle these quickly and also not reinvent the wheel every time another provider contract comes in is to create policies around this. So for example, have a cloud computing policy and have a risk assessment tool that has different columns that say, these are my preferred provisions. This is the type of liability, for example, that I hope to get when I'm contracting with a third party. But this is my first fallback position that I'm willing to take, and maybe I have a second or even a third fallback position. And then finally, these would be my walk-away positions. So you have a chart, and it goes down and it lists the major areas of negotiation in these contracts, everything from liability to what's the level of confidentiality, protection, all of those things, and you assess against this tool what are my fallback positions so that you can very quickly negotiate these contracts with the providers. So you want to create this checklist and you want to integrate it into the sourcing evaluation process along with the business step that we described in the prior slide. We have an example of the legal version of the risk-based contracting tool on this slide. In this case, the risk is the cloud platform provider wants the right to discontinue services on 30 days' notice to the customer. Not surprising, not unusual term. Cloud providers like to remain very flexible because services may change, and they want the ability to stop providing one service and go to the next better service as they innovate and evolve. You've managed through negotiation to get the provider to say, I'll extend that to 90 days notice, but I can't give you more. So now you're the customer, what are you going to do? Well, you can maintain a hot backup, another platform arrangement that you could switch to. That may not be easy, and it includes the points of integration that we talked about. You might confirm that all of your data and apps can be extracted within a 90-day period. That's certainly a conversation you want to have with your technical and business folks. And you would develop a migration plan now so that you are fairly comfortable that if you're stuck with only 90 days notice and you've got to move off of this platform and get your service or your business to another platform without interruption, that you're able to do that. Again, you may have mitigated the risk by going through some of those steps, and then you'll want to continuously monitor the provider to see if anything is changing in this risk assessment. So those are some examples of how we're seeing contract terms be put into a risk assessment and customers looking for ways in which they can mitigate the risk on their side.
And when you think about this from a contracting standpoint, you first say, well, now that I've got a risk-based contracting approach and I'm looking at a welter of these contracts, some of them are high-risk, high-value contracts where I have a great deal of leverage, all the way to some low-risk, low-value contracts where we have very little leverage. And to be efficient, you need to take your limited resources and allocate them where you can be most effective. You can do that in part by doing that analysis of risk and value and leverage, and if you have a considerable amount of leverage and there's a fair amount of risk, you might go with your own form. And to do that, of course, you have to have a form for the digital age. You have to know how to modify your standard services agreement to be an effective way of contracting for digital age services. There are, again, for efficiency, there may be many other approaches. You might negotiate from the supplier's form and do a full-out effort. You might work from the supplier's form with a light effort, or you might just do a risk review and merely click on the accept button, but understand the risks of what you're doing. If you do decide to negotiate, and you do decide that you want to negotiate on your forms, it's best to have simple, reasonable, plain English forms. It is one of the great advantages that the digital age suppliers have is that many of them have decided to come out with a very simple, plain English approach, which is easy for them to do because for the most part what they care about is limiting their liability. You as a customer have so many more concerns. To be effective in this without a set of clear market standards, you want to, of course, be aggressive but reasonable, and to move quickly in negotiations, you want to develop in advance fallback positions, ideally approved with respect to the various levels of risk and leverage you might have. And to get deals done, you need to have your contracting organization understand what's possible. That requires, of course, some training, some experience, and mostly a dedicated contracting organization who specializes in the digital age services. To mitigate risk, it's important to avoid agreeing to what suppliers will view as just cloud terms. These cloud terms are often ones that have come up from a cloud provider's history as a supplier of consumer services, or early successes when the digital age services were very new at getting extraordinarily favorable terms, such as terms which are incorporated by reference to a URL and can be changed by a supplier at its discretion, or rights to suspend services for little or no reason. And then, ideally, you will have to prepare for integrated digital age services, you will be thinking through how to retrofit, renegotiate, restructure your existing contracts, and how to build in digital age terms for those existing service providers who will begin to offer digital offerings. So each of these will require some slightly different terms than you have today. For example, IP rights, well, you might generally own everything that is produced by a supplier performing services. You might say that the supplier would own any upgrades to its platform, but you own any of your data. You might generally expect, as Rebecca said, a customer bespoke service. Here you might look for more of a software license level of assurance that the services will initially comply with specifications, and to the extent that they're improved, you'll have the benefit of the improvements. With that, I'll turn it over to Rebecca to talk about preparing for integration with digital age suppliers.
So we've talked about some steps from setting up your sourcing team to preparing your business and operational and technical teams to doing their own assessment and understanding where the gaps are, to moving into the contracting area and setting yourself up to do risk-based contracting, where you're not going to have an expectation of getting your perfect standard terms. Instead, you're going to negotiate with the digital age providers and attempt to improve the service terms, particularly in those areas where you'd like to mitigate risk. And assuming that you will not be able to mitigate all of the risk, you'll then assess where and how you can take steps on the customer side to perhaps mitigate that risk, and therefore make the overall risk profile attractive enough to go ahead and use the digital age services. But as we talked about earlier, the use of many different digital age providers requires integration across the different suppliers. And it actually becomes a key responsibility to allocate in the contracts. Thinking about the integration points that we talked about at the beginning of the presentation, again, the picture of the ITO, the example that I gave about the collaboration tools and the email systems and the different points of integration, it really works best if you think about those integration points before you're selecting and adding new suppliers into the mix. Our current experience really points to the customer at this point as being the best integrator. So as you've seen throughout this discussion, a huge shift away from the old way of doing sourcing to the new way is more is coming back into the lap of the customer. And as we've said, I think several times now, that requires more money, more people, and more investment by the customer to be really prepared to do this well. At this point, the customer who is out buying and adding all these piece parts really seems to be in the best position to be managing some of the integration points that we spoke to earlier. Now, will we see the rise of the role of a supplier that plays the integrator role across all these different relationships? Yes, we will. We're already starting to see some suppliers out there and some of the traditional IT providers moving into this space, recognizing the complexity of governing these relationships, recognizing that many customers don't have the skills and talent in their own organization to necessarily play this role. We're seeing suppliers recognize that and very smartly offer to step in to that space and play the role of the integrator so that the services will function smoothly from end to end. But this is very much a developing area, and it is one to watch.
It's also a new one to govern, and we believe that seeing these new opportunities, you will need to develop in your governance model, in your governance organization, new skills, new muscle to handle this new set of services. And you need to first think about a digital governance approach for digital age suppliers who are not designating anyone to work with you. And a good approach might be figuring out how you've been successful over the past, say, 20 years with your software vendors, who are also rarely allocating people to work with you closely and have a strategy of generally just sending out the product as opposed to developing it for you. In addition, think about whether you can implement master agreements for a set of panel providers of digital age services so that you can supersede some of the click-wrap terms that you already have. There are surveys of large companies, and they find that the average large company has hundreds of cloud arrangements, and these cloud arrangements are generally business units or employees deciding to use a cloud service for probably some good reason. And if you have dozens or hundreds of relationships with an individual cloud provider, it may serve you very well to consolidate those into a single master agreement that's big enough to get good terms and big enough for you to allocate, you and them to allocate resources to govern. You should also consider, as we've mentioned, re-examining your existing sourcing arrangements to see if you need to build new governance muscle with the people who are managing your current managed services arrangements, because those increasingly will be places where you see digital age products being introduced. Recently working with a company where they're working with a large managed service provider who is providing HR services. The managed services provider would like to incorporate new HR self-help products that are cloud-based. The provider sees tremendous benefit in lowering its own cost. The customer sees a good deal of threat in moving to a cloud-based solution for HR data. And the challenge is that the customer is not ready from a governance standpoint for how to analyze and consider that new challenge. Finally, we'd recommend that you continue to build personal connections via sales channels and user groups with the digital age suppliers so that you can be among the first to hear about their new innovations, and you can be among the first to have the opportunity to talk to them if there are problems that their products are causing for you.
So as we saw from your polling responses to our questions today, there's no doubt that digital age services and contracting is now here. It's already very much in use among this listening audience today, and that's good to know. We hope that you've learned something about the sourcing approach that we've been through on this slide, about even if you're using these services, how you might go back and rethink your sourcing process and improve it over what you're using today. There's no question that yesterday's sourcing approach is not going to meet today's needs in terms of contracting with these providers. So you'll want to spend time looking at it, preparing yourself, updating your strategies and policies, creating this new sourcing approach, developing your templates and your risk assessment tools, creating your integration plans, and then adapting your governance approaches to meet these challenges. So we thank you for listening today, and Sarah, we'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, we do have some questions. This is very, very fascinating, particularly to me, who's just been finishing up writing some content on artificial intelligence, and now I'm feeling like I need some more information here. But we do have a few questions. One is, how is the rise of digital age services impacting the need for offshore labor? Have you seen a decrease in human labor needs as a result of the increase in digital age company services?
That is certainly a major issue, and there is and some people are forecasting that the offshoring movement may be reversed, as initially, as with manufacturing, the labor went offshore to find lower labor rates, and then the work came back onshore with lights off factories. We are seeing places where suppliers are dramatically reducing the cost of their services or bidding dramatically fewer FTEs by using digital age services.
Yeah, we talked earlier about with robotics and process automation, machines replacing people. So when you were offshoring, you were replacing labor with cheaper labor. Now you're going to be replacing labor with machines, and it's slightly less important where those machines are located. So there's definitely going to be an impact on labor-based services, which I think would have an impact on some of the offshoring locations.
The other piece to consider is the type of labor, because if the automation reduces, say, the easiest 90%, takes away the easiest 90% of a process, the part which is easiest to automate, that was also the piece that might have been offshored. And it is possible that in some cases the offshore component of a service will go away, but the people doing the higher level functions will remain, as happened in manufacturing, where high-level engineers who keep the plant running remain part of the automated manufacturing process, but the vast bulk of the labor goes away, including the vast bulk of the offshore labor.
Thank you. We've got a lot of questions that are flying in, and we'll try to get to a couple of them really quickly. One of them is that there are many terms out there that are new digital age terms. You've mentioned some of them: autonomics, robotic process automation, cognitive computing, and others such as machine learning, big data, and artificial intelligence. For someone who is new to this area, how can they figure out, quote unquote, what is what and how they are all related to each other?
I'm not sure the industry has figured out what is what yet, so I say stay tuned. I mean, you can go to any number of sources on the internet or at some of the universities and get their definitions of what those things are, but most of the information that I've looked at, there can definitely be a blurring. Even in the example I gave, there was a blurring between, process automation and cognitive computing. So some of these things may blur together. I agree. It is not unlike cloud that there are various references out there that don't have standardized meanings and therefore can be confusing to people. All those terms you mentioned, Sarah, are in the same category.
There's a book called Big Data, A Revolution That Will Change the Way We Live, Work, and Think that I'd very much recommend on big data. There are a few books out. I don't have one to recommend, but there are a few good books out now on the sort of the rise of the robots idea, the way that new services are transforming the way that we will work.
Interesting. Thank you for that. We actually have reached the top of the hour, and we have a bunch of questions that we were not able to get to, so we have to cut them off, unfortunately. But we will make sure that your questions are given directly to Rebecca and Brad, and we'll ask for them to reach out directly to you for responses to those questions. So those questions will be answered. I'm sorry, we just don't have time to do it on today's webinar. Very, very informative. Thank you so much, Rebecca and Brad. I truly always appreciate listening to both of you speak, because I think you both do it in such a way that is impactful and sincere and interesting and informative, and this one is just another great example of that. And as I said, for me personally, having recently worked on some content related to this area, it was very, very fascinating for me, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
We are currently pushing this presentation to you. There's a file transfer button on your screen. If you'd like to download this to your desktop, you can do so now. Please feel free to share this with colleagues in your company. It will be archived on our website as well for 3 years, and you can download or replay it at any time. So please make sure that you share this link with people. Again, if you have any questions that were unanswered, please reach out to Brad or to Rebecca directly. Their contact information is on your screens right now. And with that, thank you again to Rebecca and Brad and to Mayor Brown for providing us with this great information. And we will see you all soon. This is Sarah just saying, we hope you have a great day.